Billings. I'm Chief Information Security Officer for HP's federal business. Kind of by way of background, so what does that mean? I'm a retired naval cryptologic officer. I spent the first 12 some odd years on the offensive side of the thing that we call the internet, the digital world. So I worked the offensive side for many, many years. A lot of what other nation states are doing to us today, I did to them back in the day. Okay. So I come at the security problem from a different perspective. I come at it from a very deep technical, very deep understanding of the techniques and processes that we go through from a nation state perspective. And then I moved over to the defensive side. And I did the defensive side for the last 10 years of my career. I had the fortunate opportunity to run and manage the National Security Agency's Information Assurance Directorate's Global Blue Team. Anybody familiar with the Global Blue Team? Yes, no? Familiar with the Red Team, right? No? So the NSA has, within the Information Assurance Directorate, they have two teams. One is the Red Team that actively goes after U.S. government networks and systems by the network owner's request. The Blue Team is on the other side. The Blue Team goes in there first usually, which is where we like to be, or we go in after if the Red Team has been successfully spanking you. The Blue Team goes in there and helps you understand what you should have done and what you should be doing better. And that involves both from a technical perspective and from a process perspective as well as a people perspective. So it goes all encompassing. Mostly it's focused within the Department of Defense, some of the work done within the intelligence community, as well as some of the work done on the other civilian agencies as well. Every once in a while, depending on the government, the state and local government, we would have gone down to the state level as well. That's in the state like that. So I come at that from the 22-year perspective of both the offensive and defensive side. I retired from the Navy in 2003. Yes, I'm that old. Retired from the Navy in 2003, where I had the opportunity to become Microsoft CISO for their federal business. I ran that business for about 7 years, and get it? No? Look at that. I ran that business for 7 years, and I was also advising a number of small startup companies from a security perspective, both from a business standpoint as well as from a security technology standpoint. And I joined a small company, global company, as their global CISO and ran their federal government, their government et al. Business as well. Left there after 2 years. A good friend of mine that was at HP called me one day and said, "Hey, remember that job that you were doing over in HP at Microsoft? We would really love for you to come over and do it over at HP." And here I am. So what I'm going to talk about with you today is what is old is new. Okay? I've been in this space. How many people have been doing, let's see, how many people are doing information security for 5 years? 10 years? 15? 1? No? So I've been in the space for 22, 23 years now. From the very early days to where we are today. And it's amazing how much we're relearning what we've done early in the time, right? So that's what the talk is all about, is what is old is new. With that, before I start, take that into the context, right? Any questions, any thoughts on where you would want me to touch on, so I make sure I touch those bases? Are there any highlights that you're looking for to make sure I touch base on those? Come on, I'm not here just taking up your time. You've got to come in here for a specific reason, look for something specific.
Well, if your title this is Back to Basics, if you're bringing a brand new idea back to your organization that may or may not have something filed on the top shelf of somewhere, I'd love to hear how to go about doing that.
Okay, absolutely. Yes, sir.
Are you able to discuss anything regarding advanced persistent threats and how to look for that type of threat in your organization?
Sure. Okay, absolutely. Sir?
I'd like to hear some more about the offensive work that you did in terms of what could we learn from
Are you clear?
No.
Sure. Part of that I'll talk about that perspective, but I'll approach it from that perspective. Any others? Well, we're still waiting, kind of on that line, right? The National Security Agency said, from an offensive standpoint, they said publicly a number of times, at best they are number 5 in the world, meaning there are 4 other nations on the face of this earth that are far better at what they do than they are themselves. I know the level of sophistication of the National Security Agency, at least what it was in 2003 when I left. And if there are 4 other nations that are better at it than we are, I can't say who they are. I'm sorry, I can't get this to look. It's scary. It's absolutely scary. So it's not a question. So how many believe that on their enterprises today that you are able to keep the bad actors out? Bad actors, be it insider threat and or external threat. Who believes that they can keep the bad guys out? That's good. I like to see that. Right? We're not keeping them out. Right? We have to. And we don't have to look any further than local media on any given day to see that we're not keeping the bad guys out. Okay? Look at Target. Okay? Look at now, which has now been the largest. I read this morning was that 46 million credit cards from Home Depot were lost. It's a new record, unfortunately. Yeah. We're not keeping them out, and we'll talk about why we're not keeping them out. I say that the reason we are, from a very high level, the reason we're not keeping them out is because the security infrastructure and all the security infrastructure, the way I look at it, is standard firewall, antivirus, anti-malware, intrusion detection system, intrusion prevention systems, and the like. When you hear me saying security infrastructure, that's what I'm kind of referring to. It's not there, right? It's at best, my finger in the air. Is it 80%? Maybe. Is it 90%? Maybe. Would I run a modern enterprise today without any security infrastructure? Absolutely not. I'm not saying that it's broken and we're not going to do it. We have to use it. I'm just saying is that we have to look at the problem from a much different perspective than we have there. And for those who are just coming in, one second, those who are just coming in late, we're stalling for time. Until I get my presentation up. Yes, sir.
Well, when I listened to the keynote speaker, Kevin, and I thought about best defense is good offense, now I hear that we're number 5, and what are we doing as a country, for the countries that are attacking it, what are we doing offensively to stop it from happening if it's truly countries and not people or corporations? So we can't play that role.
Sure. So the hard part of that is attribution. Right? Do we know that in fact is one country over another? Okay. Of those 4 countries, the obvious one is not, that we're all thinking about off the top of our heads right now, is not one of those 4. But the other 4 have all realized if I hide underneath the noise of that other one, right? Learn the game. They all understand the game, right? If I can hide under the noise and make you think that I'm this other country, keeps them off my side. So the key to that problem is the attribution. Is getting the attribution to know for sure. And this discussion's been on for, at least in the halls of the Department of Defense, for a good 20 plus years. Right? Is how do you make sure that you've got the authority? That you know exactly who you are saying you are. That you claim that I claim that you're the attacker. How do I know for sure it's you and not him? Right? Because if I either have to drop kinetic on top of your head, or I got to throw something else at you digitally, I got to make sure it's you and not him. Or him and not you. Awesome. All right. Another shoot. See if I can get this other thing working too. So we got to hit a lot of this. We're until 11:45, correct? Yes. Into my time. Let's go. And this vibrates in 40 minutes, and I get off. Make sure we can do this. Yep. Okay. So background on me, got all that pieces, and this is what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about, what is new, what is old is new, and why we need to think about the problem differently. Right? From my old Navy days, naval officer days, in War College, we studied Sun Tzu until there was no end of the day. Right? And it's apropos. It's really apropos. For us on the security side, the defensive side of IT, we have to understand not only ourselves really, really well, and I contend that many of our organizations do not understand ourselves all that well as the enemy. We have to understand the adversary and what they're doing and how they're doing it and why they are doing it. Right? In the earlier session I was just saying earlier, one of the questions that came about was, well, if I get an attack, I just pull the plug. That's not always the right answer. Okay? Especially from a nation-state perspective, maybe I want to watch. I want to understand what they're doing. So understand their TTPs, if you will. Right? So you've got to understand the adversaries. Now, part of that I like to do is help people understand is the world that we live in today. Yes, we all understand the internet, but let me show you a different side of the internet that we have to survive against on any given day. So the new reality in the threat perspective, approximately 8 new internet users are coming onto the internet every second. Now it's not us, right? It's not our moms, it's not our dads coming on the network, it's not our children coming on. Sure, they're part of that number. But a large part of that number come from different societal norms than we here in the US and or the Western world, and cultural norms. Also come in from very many different governmental norms as well. Right? So here in the United States, we are not allowed to, the intelligence apparatus of the United States government is not allowed to focus in on the spy on foreign companies and take that data and give it back to US companies. Right? But in countries like China, they can do that. Spy on a US country and I can give it to Huawei. I can give it to a Chinese company. And not just to pick on China, but it also happens in France, it's the same rules, Brazil have the same rules, and many other countries on the face of the same rules. So we're working in a totally different environment than these 8 people that are coming on the network in every given second. There are roughly 250,000 new pieces of malware every day. Going back to what I described as the information security infrastructure that exists today, can it keep up with that? No way. Absolutely no way. So if you're dependent on your information security, your security infrastructure to cover for that, this is why I say at best maybe 80, maybe 90%, you're going to be able to cover that. I wouldn't run one without it, but I have to, because I have to have it. But it's not going to cover everything, because it's just rolling out too fast. Roughly 30,000 new infected websites every day. Any guesses as to why greater than 80% of those are from small businesses? Low-hanging fruit, not enough resources, right? They don't have the money, they don't have the people to secure them. What's the other advantage of using a small business?
They rely on big business.
They rely on big business, right? So government perspective, right? So I use the state of Washington, D.C., right? Government agency, as a government employee, I want to see, we're going to go to lunch one day. So what do? I go to the restaurant on the internet and I download their menu. And what is that menu usually formatted on? PDF. Now I bring that infected website's PDF into my network. Okay? Waterholing, we'll talk a little bit about those. So this is why the small businesses, there's a lot of fact, and the question of the point earlier, alluded point, is that what the U.S. government and DHS, Department of Homeland Security, is working on is how do I affect these small, medium businesses, SMB, small, medium businesses, because we see that as a huge impact to the network. Remember back in the day, it was always about my mom, about the home user. We've sort of cleaned up that problem. Now we have to focus on the small and medium business as a nation. So, 243 days is the average time to detect a breach. So if a breach was to happen in your network today, in your enterprise today, you wouldn't discover it until next June. Middle of summer of next year before you detect it. Scary, isn't it? 84% of those happen at the application layer.
And where are these numbers from? Are they from HP?
In this case, these studies, the research from the HP studies, yes. I was told we can't mention HP, so I'm trying to avoid the commercialization, if you will. Since 2010, the time to resolve that attack is 71% longer than it was in 2010. But the really scary part of it is this. 94% of those breaches were not identified by the party that was breached. They were identified by a third party. Target. Did anybody know who notified Target?
Probably banks.
Nope.
Krebs.
Nope. Krebs jumped on it early, but they were notified. They were looking at it because of the Secret Service. Secret Service was doing an active investigation on credit card, easy for me to say, credit card fraud, and they kept seeing the same threat, and that same threat being Target credit cards. So they gave Target a call and said, hey, we think you have a problem. And it was a classic, going on further, I can dive in deeper into what happened after that point, but it's classic as an example of a third party notifying them. Okay. So we have to overcome this, right? We have to overcome this. As I talked about earlier, water holing, right? I'm going to go after a site I know you're going to present because you trust that site, and I'm going to infect that site to get onto your network. Oh, the other one. Intranet. Keyword. A lot of them are happening on the internet, not just the internet as well. Okay. If I can get on, because you're trusting that your internet sites, if I can get on those and impact you that way, you get that PDF warning, are you going to probably, that's probably BS. Okay. No, that's not true. Right? I really do want to see the dancing pigs. Right? Social media, shortened links. You know Bitly? Everybody know Bitly? And the other shortened URL links. About 32% of the time, malicious content is hidden in those sites just because they're easy to look through, right? Or not easy to look through, I should say, put that in proper English. If I look at a Bitly URL, I scroll over it, I can't tell that if it's, Bank of America or, California's.gov. I can't tell, right? And that's part of the problem. They realize that and they can utilize those. Email phishing and spear phishing. Interesting part on the spear phishing is executives, right? Thorny subject with the security folks, right? There's a lot of egos there. There's a lot of issues, other issues there as well. But you have to get your senior executives have to be under different mitigation techniques and styles, and you have to help them understand what they're looking at. What they potentially are up against. A very large government cabinet-level agency had a bot server internal to their network was running, being managed by C2, by somebody else, but managed an internal server on their network. In that bot, they had a list of names and primary targets that they wanted to go after and keywords that they were looking for. All of the senior executives were on that list, with the exception of one, the CISO, but he got put on the list after we wanted to prove something, and all of the political appointees. Everybody else was not on, there was nobody else on the list, just those folks. And what this bot server would do is send out bots looking for these specific keywords at these specific people and these specific sites. So what we did as an experiment is we sent an email that the CISO was upgrading their malware, anti-malware, upgrading it. And he was going from company A to company B. And what he wanted to do was to ensure everybody knew about it. So the experiment was, let's send an email out to the workforce saying, well, this is what's going to happen. We're going to change from A to B. And within an hour of that email, guess who popped up on that watch list now? CISO. Why? because you now have the potential of getting in their way. Okay? The key, back to your question earlier, the key behind this part is understanding that the adversary is watching the watchers. I'm going to watch you watch me. Because if I'm not watching you watch me, then I'm going to trip up on something. Okay? I'm going to fit into your network just like you manage your network. If you're using first initial, last name in your logons, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to mimic you just like you run your network, so I don't bring up any undue suspicion upon myself. So the reason why they're doing this is so they can get in there and not only mine the information, that's a given, but the other aspect to it a lot of people forget or miss is the fact that they're watching you watch them. Mobile threats, I don't even know where to begin with mobile threats. They're all over the place. Mobile, it's a significant problem. Not to single any one of them out, they're all roughly about the same. But you have to have a mobile plan. Mobile plan. If you don't have a mobile plan, you don't have a plan. Right? You've got a significant problem there. Anybody using mobile? Allowing users to bring mobile phones into the networks? Okay. We do allow it. One of the couple things that we do is allow it to be able to connect to the network to get email, to do anything. I have to be able to encrypt it, and I got to put a pin on it. Regardless if it's your personal phone, right? And in our case, it's all personal phones. I bring my personal phone, and I want to now connect it to the corporate infrastructure. This is what I have to bring to myself. It's got to be encrypted, and it's got to be a pin put on it. Right? And oh, by the way, HP also reserves the right if I lose my phone, they can go out and wipe it as well. I can do it as well. I can go through Outlook Web Access, and I can go to Outlook Web Access, say I lost my phone in a taxi cab or wherever, and I can wipe that phone as well. But the corporate environment by policy will always reserve the right to be able to wipe that phone at any given time, regardless of if it's personal data or professional data, business data. We don't care. If you want to connect it, this is what you have to take on board. Malware behavior. This is an interesting one, is that 50% of all malware downloads are downloaded within the first 60 seconds of that machine getting impacted with it. That's not, in my view, that's not the nefarious side. The really nefarious is the bullet after that. The remaining 50% wait. Why do they wait? Won't be detected, right? Why? Because the firewall has to maintain state. Right? If I can wait you out longer than a minute, most firewalls, all firewalls, can't maintain state that long. So if I wait greater than that 60 seconds and then do something, or I can wait a number of days and do something, all the better for me. Okay. So I see some people have seen it. This is what we have to deal with from a security perspective. Not all our users are good. Right? But it takes one bad one to impact everybody else. So my point on this slide is trying to understand who are the good and who are the bad. We can't, as security professionals, we cannot make the assumption that all users are bad. Yes, users do dumb things. Right? But just because somebody does something dumb doesn't mean that there is a nefarious reason behind it. And the corollary to that as well. Right? They do something bad, it doesn't mean that it was something that they did dumb, right? So you can't look at the problem, and this goes back into the whole strategic view of how I view the security problem. You can't look at this one thing and say every user is bad. Because of what the inputs and things that we can do to monitor the network, we have that ability to say, you're bad, you're bad, you're bad, you're bad, you're bad. Well, the reality of it is only one of you is there, and how do we figure that out? Carnegie Mellon did a study last year. 50% of the adversaries are from outsiders. 23% are insiders. And 21% are unknown. So the architect of Home Depot, who is now in jail, he's been in jail for a couple years now, or just over a year. He's in jail because when he left Home Depot, he went for a different company, and he left that company and took some privileged passwords with him. And they went back into and did some things, right, some bad things. So where does he fall? In Home Depot, right? Not pointing any fingers at him, I don't understand, but is he an outsider? Actually, is he an insider? Could be, but really is an unknown right now, right? Did he architect something into that network that allowed what happened to happen? Don't know, right? That's why the unknown is there, because we just don't know in the forensics understanding of what's going on and how they're doing it on a daily basis. So let's turn to the adversary from a perspective of what we're dealing with. So cybercrime, organized crime. Think about the cybercrime piece from that's organized crime. The hacktivists, the anonymouses of the world, and the nation states. I consider them all one and the same. There's a level of sophistication issue, and I don't have the slide, but I would say it's an XY. The nation state level of sophistication here over time has been up here. The hacktivists, the cybercrime group, their level of sophistication is on a much greater curve, right? They're growing faster, but there always will be a delta between the two of them. The nation state will always maintain a delta above everybody else, in my opinion. So it's understanding how they all look at the problem. But in respect to that, there is an ecosystem that the adversaries are using that are far better than anything that we have on the security side. Their ability to share information on a near real time is far better than we could have today. Even amongst, say, all y'all, too much in the East Coast, all of you sharing in yourself, in your individual agency, or amongst other government, state government agencies. Okay? Your ability to share is far slower than these groups are. Because they can take that and that information and share it back and forth with each other. So they've got processes just like we do in business on how they share. You want to buy an active VPN credential for a company, from a government agency, you can buy it. And oh, by the way, with that, you get to use it for a period of time, and you get an SLA with that as well. All of this is marked out on the sites, right? So they've got a very different, very viable business that they use to do all this. The actors amongst themselves are very organized, and they are very specialized. If I wanted a vulnerability on, I'll use OpenSSL before Heartbleed, right? So OpenSSL, I want a vulnerability. I'm going into a company as an attacker, I'm going into an enterprise that I know they're using OpenSSL. I look back to the specialization team. Does anybody have any vulnerabilities on OpenSSL? Right? If I'm well known in the community, I'll most likely get a 0 day. Somebody will say, hey, I've got this. Or look at it from a patch perspective. Right? Many of you may have heard from the Microsoft standpoint, right? Is when Microsoft implements Patch Tuesday, they announce it a couple days prior. And why do they do it a couple days prior? It's because what happens is as soon as Microsoft announces it, and any vendor announces that they've got a patch coming out, what does this community start doing?
We're trying to reverse engineer.
They try to reverse engineer it. They start talking about it. Hey, I think this is what they're going to do. I think does anybody have this? Well, I've got, and it's an iterative process, right? I can see it, I've got it working on Windows 95, but I can't get it to work on Windows 7 yet. Somebody else will say, well, I think I got it to work, and so this iterative process goes back and forth all the way through the attack process. And then they trade this information, right? They trade this information in real time. I'll share with you one information, and I may share with you some other information. And I may say I'm going to share with you, but I want some Bitcoins from it as well. Right? Or I may want dollars, or I may use Silk Road to exchange something for this. So all this information is being brought back and forth on a real-time basis. On a security side, on the defensive side, can we do this? Do we do this anywhere near this? Sure, we have the ISACs, right? We have the ISACs, but do we share at this level? No way. No way. It's tough. It's a hard problem. Anybody seen this before? It's kind of the TTPs, if you will, of what the attackers are going through. So long before I even get on your network, I'm going to find who I am, who you are, and why I want to get on my target list. You either have a piece of information. I was talking to a large insurance company the other day, and they said, well, we don't have any information that the attackers want. I said, well, do you have Bill Billings as your a client? Well, yeah. Well, you have information on Bill Billings, and if I'm a target and you have information on me, guess what? Now you have become a target because I want the information on Bill Billings, or I want the information on whoever it is. So you can't hide behind the fact that I'm never going to be a target. You have to understand that if the information is, if you hold that information, that they want it. So defining the target, find and organize your accomplices. Understand, as I said in the previous slide, what are the things that I'm after and what are the things I'm up against. Build and acquire tools. Obviously, if I'm not going on a Windows network, I'm going to get the tools against the Windows network, and I'm not going to use Linux tools. Right? If I wanted to raise my profile loud and screaming really, really loud, I use a Unix tool against a Windows network. Right? Not a good way to keep my profile low and slow. So a lot of work. I'm going to do research the target infrastructure as well as the people. In the old days of, remember dumpster diving? Think about that from a digital perspective. Dumpster diving, Google diving, whatever you want to call it, right? Of understanding who your executives are, who you are as security professionals. Then I'm going to test for detection. What does that mean? Am I going to go live and test it against your network? No, 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 no. Never will do that, right? But what do I have in my security infrastructure? I've got every known IDS, or I know the fact that you're using this version of IDS and this version of IPS, and you're using this version of anti-malware and spyware. Right? So I'm going to run that in my lab environment, and I'm going to run my attack against it. Why? So I don't get detected. Right? As soon as I've gone through all my QA and said, yep, I'm good to go, then I'm going to deploy it. Then I'm going to go after you. I could use a multitude of different ways, if we saw it in the earlier slide, right? I can use other websites and get on your network. I can do emails. I can do malware. Whatever I need to do to get in your network, that's the way I'm going to get in your network. Once I get in the initial intrusion, most likely, in most cases, I'm going to stay slow. Stay quiet so you don't see me. Going back to the point earlier, is I want to see if you recognize it, if you understand that I'm on your network. Once I get past there, then I'm going to do an outbound connection. Some of this does automatically. This is that level of sophistication. Remember the earlier slide on the malware, 50% of the time it goes right out and establishes a C2 connection. 50% of the time it waits. To me, that's a level of sophistication. If it's the latter 50%, I'm going to wait and establish that outbound connection. Why do I need that outbound connection? Before I spread, why do I need that? I heard it.
Exfiltrate data.
Before I exfiltrate data, what do I need it?
You need it because most outbound traffic isn't monitored or filtered.
Your firewall. It's a lot easier. It's a lot easier to go out than in.
You're bouncing around it. I need to be able to control it. Right? I need to control what I have in your network. That bot of that cabinet level agency I referred to earlier, I needed to control that bot. Right? I need to keep it throttled. I don't want to be too loud. I just want to be at the right place, just below your radar. So I need this C2 connection initiated back out. And then, of course, I'm going to use it for exfil, right? And I'm going to use it for other ability to move the data around as well. And then I'm going to expand my access. What am I looking for? I'm in a Windows network. What am I looking for? What kind of passwords?
Domain.
I'm looking for domain passwords, right? You want to know an interesting thing? Microsoft, absolutely verboten, fireable offense for using a domain level access to log on to an endpoint client. Absolutely verboten. Why is that?
There's a keylogger on there.
Right? Yeah, absolutely. Plus the other Windows issue about credentials. Right? Absolutely verboten. So even help desk can't even log on interactively to that machine. So I gain the credentials, I strengthen my foothold, and I spread. Right? Why do I spread?
Don't get caught in one place, but not another.
Yep. Well, another good reason. Why do I spread? More information. I got to understand what kind of information I want, and what potential do I have, right? And now I can either exfiltrate that data, move that data off the network, or I can sit and wait, right? In that cabinet level agency, as described earlier, I'm just going to sit and look. I got keywords that I'm looking for, and my bots are going to do their thing. When they find that information, then I'll exfil that data. Right? We saw in the State Department that the Chinese would sit here and wait. They wait and they wait and they wait. Why are they waiting? Because they know at some point we're going to have negotiations, government-level negotiations between us and the Chinese. And what are they after when they know we're going to set up a date to have those negotiations? They're after understanding our talking points. And I forget which issue it was, but there was some, before the negotiations began, the Chinese were in there and we discovered them, thankfully, just before we went into negotiations, because they had all of our talking points. They knew exactly where we were going. And wouldn't you like to go into any meeting where you're negotiating, knowing what the other party is going to be negotiating? And then cover our tracks and remain undetected. Once I spread, if you find me here, I'm over there. If you find me there, I'm over there somewhere else, right? I need to stay. Stay in the network. I got to guarantee my way back into the network.
The detection part is, from the government standpoint, would be good because if you know the talking points, you can also feed them the false information.
Absolutely.
So it can be used two ways, right?
Absolutely.
Why you don't just want to unplug?
Agreed. That's exactly it. I know it's hard to read, and it's not meant to point out. Anybody remember Cuckoo's Egg? Clifford Stoll? Oh, come on. Some of you have been around. I got one guy in the back. So Clifford Stoll was a scientist at the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. And he, long story short, there was a penny or two, a couple cents difference in some accounting records. And being the scientist, he wanted to dig into this, figure out why it was there. And what he discovered was there's a broader attack going on and fraud going on through a German. And this is, to my point of spreading out, right? This is how the German got into the individual got into Lawrence Livermore and what he was ultimately after. You can see he was down in defense contractor in Texas. He was in Atlanta, Georgia, Cambridge, Mass. He was in Norfolk, telephone exchange in Germany, digital network. He was in University of Germany. He was all over the place. Point in, ultimately to get where he needed to be, and how did he stay in the network. Take this, extrapolate this into your enterprise. If I can get in there, I'm going to spread as far as I can do. Solar Sunrise, anybody remember Solar Sunrise? Heard of Solar Sunrise? So Solar Sunrise was back in, I want to say, 98. It was some Israeli teenagers were going after some DoD sites here in the state of California. And they penetrated them. They were successful in getting the network. But the Air Force, once the Air Force had found out and told the other services, the Air Force went in and flattened the networks, literally flattened them. Took them all down, reloaded them from scratch, as so they thought. Within days, they were right back in. Right? Because they had gotten into routers, they had gotten into switches, they had gotten into the fabric of the network, exploiting vulnerabilities so they could get themselves back in later on. And we still see that to this day, those sort of techniques. So if you think that your entry point, you've got to think that the entry point is but the entry point. Now they could be almost anywhere else, and you've got to ferret that out. So I've always approached my security teams, I've always approached it from a cultural standpoint, is it's not a question of if, it's not a question of when. They're in the network today. Why do I change that culture? Because it fundamentally makes us look at the problem differently. No longer are we the great defenders of the horde, right, the great unwashed. But the great unwashed are in the network with us, And it forces everybody to look at that problem from that perspective. How do I root them out as fast as I can? How do I vet the problem out as fast as I can? So I can go get in the middle of this somewhere. In the government, in the DOD, we call it the OTA loop, right? How do I disrupt their process? And if I can disrupt it anywhere in this process, the better off it is for me. Oops, wrong way. The other part of it is our predictability is well known as enterprises, right? We know we all use the same, right? If you're using NIST 800-53, if you're using COBIT, if you're using ITIL, if you're using ISO 27001, all known, guess what the bad actors are going to do? They're going to mimic your network the same way. I'm not saying these are not bad. We have to use them. That goes without saying. But just understand that the bad actors know these same. We all have limited resources, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on your perspective, but we all have limited resources. And our ability to share amongst ourselves within communities of interest is very, very difficult. It's trying to get better. There's been a lot of bills in Congress to try to overcome this. And there's a few companies out there that are really trying to help communities of interest share this attack information across the community. The financial sector within a company, anybody heard of Red Sky Alliance? No? Yes? Yeah. So Red Sky Alliance is about sharing this information. The CEO of the company came out of DHS CERT, a US CERT, when the DICE program moved from CERT into DHS, and a lot of the federal businesses or companies said, we're not going to play anymore. And he established a company to be able to build that information and share it amongst them all, and it's doing phenomenally well. The other part of it is our own selves, right? Our IT, has anybody's IT infrastructure stayed the same? I hope not exactly, right? No, we don't change, right? We're this movement into the cloud, movement into big data, and movement into mobile and other things. Right? One of the things I took away when I was at NSA and I was managing the blue team, every blue team we went into, no matter what organization we went into, the same question was asked: do you have a current map of your infrastructure? And what do you think the answer was?
No.
Yes. Yes, we do. Let me see it, but it's wrong. Let me see it. We would have to go in and map it ourselves, and we'd say, no, they're night and day, black and white, two totally different, Because why? Because there's a lot of things going on in the network. This is where I learned what I call the science projects of security, or science projects from a CIO perspective, the science projects have no business on the operational network. None whatsoever. When you're doing these science projects, they have to be in the lab, in the closed environment, prove out what you need to prove out, and then do a low and slow proof of concept on the operational network. But before you're at that POC, that science experiment cannot be done on the operational network because of this problem. Big data. I know it's like APT, right? It's an overused word right now. Big data. If I know you're hoarding, bad word. I know if you're collecting big data and you're mining big data for your own business needs as well as security needs, and that's a whole different discussion on the security side of what big data can do for us. Don't you think that as an attacker, if I know you've got that information, I'm going to sit out, I'm going to go after that as well. So it's a two-edged sword, it's a double-edged sword, that big data problem. So from a security perspective, we really need to change our strategies for this new reality. Sure, on time here. Ding. Who hasn't seen this? Go ahead, raise your hand. Really? Okay. So the classic risk equation, been doing this for many years. Risk management, right? Risk is equal to the function of vulnerability, threat, and consequence over countermeasures, divided by countermeasures. That's how we define risk. Anybody doing that today? Anybody not doing that today? More and more, don't be surprised. More and more enterprises are not doing it. Why? I contend why they're not doing it. I was going to ask a question, but I decided not to. Why they're not doing it? Because we get too caught up in how we measure things. Should it be a 9? Should it be a 10? Should it be a 100? I don't care. From my role as a CISO, just measure it. There's a scale from 1 to 10, 1 to 100. I don't care. That's how we're going to define it. We cannot do this analysis by paralysis problem, paralysis analysis problem. We have to get beyond that. So this is an important thing. When we think about our threats, when we think about countermeasures, and we think about the consequences, right? In the panel earlier, we were talking about those consequences of what happens when the network goes down, when the enterprise goes down, right? Measure it, define it, and then go forward with it. Until you can get this down and have that understanding with the agency director, with the CEO, because he or she understands risk. They're managing risk. It's nothing new to them. They're managing risk from a different perspective. We have to articulate that risk in IT into what they're doing and how they do that. A great friend of mine, Tony Sager, who I used to work for, he's come up with this thing called the security of fog of more. Right? In other words, there are so many things that we as security professionals have to do. We can't focus on any one of them very well. Right? Two-factor security controls, whitelisting, you name it, right? I mean, this is just a snapshot of what's out there. What this creates is this defender's challenge. It creates ability for us not to understand is where, how can I extend my information reach? How far, who has the information I need, and who do I need to reach out to get that? It also goes into who can I trust? Do I trust Bill Billings from HP? Do I trust Bob Jones from IBM? Do I trust another vendor? Do I trust whoever? Who do I trust? That is another hard problem that we have to, this fog of more causes. And how do I find and validate the practices at work? If I'm using ITIL, is it working? Does it work for you? Does it work for me? If I'm sharing information with others from a TTP perspective, from a tactics and training perspective, does that work? Does it help me mitigate the problem even better? Can I defend against my network faster? Can I drive prioritized action? This is a lot of what I've seen over the years. This one, prioritized action. Collecting data for collecting data's sake. Or what I like to say in the intelligence community, they go, this intelligence for intelligence sake. I call this security for security's sake. We collect it because we can. Is it actionable? That's the question we have to ask ourselves as security professionals. Is it actionable? And if it is, what is that action that I can take place from having that information? And how do I know if something relevant changes across either the community or across my enterprise? OpenSSL, Heartbleed. Everybody heard of Heartbleed? Was it one vulnerability or multiple vulnerabilities? So if you patched against Heartbleed, or your vendor patched against Heartbleed, did you know that there were 7 other vulnerabilities that were not patched in the Heartbleed patch in OpenSSL? Right? So what are the relevant changes? What is that perspective? And it's easy for me to say, how can I do the right thing and then prove it? This is the other aspect that I contend in the security community that we have not done well, that we don't do well. Right? That science experiment that I was talking about earlier, that proof of concept on the network. So we work with the CIO, we get this proof of concept out, and we go and roll it out. We say, yep, it did everything that we wanted to do. We measured it and did everything that we wanted to do. Now we're going live. Are we done with it? No. We have to keep going back and verifying, because we all know that our best laid plans are going to change as we go forward, right? You really didn't think about it that way. I need to think about it differently. So I'm measuring that environment, that new point of POC. I want to continue to make sure it's doing what it's supposed to do. And if it doesn't, then we need to change it. Our priorities change, our requirements change, so we have to understand that as well. Anybody familiar with the Council on Cybersecurity? And the top 10 security controls, or top 20, I'm sorry, top 20 security controls? SANS, top 20? There's another word, right? So, the Council on Cybersecurity is a nonprofit organization. that took over ownership of the formerly known SANS Top 20. So if you look up the Council on Cybersecurity, you see the ownership of that, of the Top 20 has moved over there. Anybody using them today, the Top 20 controls? Good, bad, or indifferent so far?
Challenging.
Challenging.
Good.
Implementation challenging?
Yes.
Prioritizing. Prioritizing, yep, absolutely. Anybody else using them?
Kind of as a framework, realizing, you can take it as prioritization. I mean, they kind of give you what's priority in their views, but applying it to your environment
Right.
is a little bit of a different story, and it's a lot of stuff that's outside of our control.
Sure.
For example, in a bit larger organization, step one is assets, right? And from a security operations standpoint, it's like, you can preach it all day long, but we're not hands on the ground for, asset management.
Right.
So it makes it challenging. That's a good word, challenging.
Yep, absolutely. And the council is open to those kind of that feedback as well. They want to hear this. What the council is about doing is taking things that they've learned, other organizations have learned that have been very successful, that they can bring out to the broader community. Back to the gentleman's question earlier on, what is the nation, what the government is trying to do, albeit it's a nonprofit. Both Tony Sager and Jane Lutz were former SESs in the U.S. government. DHS with Jane, and then Tony was at the NSA. What are the kind of best practices that we can move out into the community? So as practitioners, we can take something that's been successful, and how do we move it forward? So as they're moving forward on this, I know they're actively looking for feedback on these sort of things. NSA's equivalent in the Australian government, DSD, Defense Signals Director, thank you. They have a similar thing. They've got the top 20, but they contend the top 4. If you can implement the top 4, that 90% of vulnerabilities go away. Just with the top 4, not these top 4. They are a little bit different because they have a lot more control over the enterprises and the networks and what they can do. So if you look up DSD, Australia, Top 20 does a great white paper on that as well. So the opportunity to secure ourselves against defeat lies in our own hands. We understand the network, we understand the adversary. Once you understand both of those, then we can only then begin to defend our network as best as we can. But we have to understand ourselves. In the earlier talk we did earlier, and some of you were there, I'm a huge believer in the ability to communicate. As I said then, and I'll say it again, communicate. And if you think you've communicated enough, communicate some more. Right? You got to communicate with our business partners inside their individual business, from the networking folks to the operation folks to everybody, because you got to work with them, as well as your business partners, both government agency-wise, as well as your partners as an ISPs and the like. The only way we're going to get ahead of this problem is if we can communicate and share information better, and or at least in real time as fast as the adversaries are doing it. Because it's not going to go away. There's not a silver bullet when we talk about security. There will never be, in my opinion, there will never be a silver bullet. Right? It's a war of escalation. I implement something, what do the attackers do? They're going to change their TTPs, change their ways around things. Right? I mitigate that problem, they're going to work around it. So it's not about securing a network, it's about protecting the network. And when we articulate that with our senior executives, we have to understand, we have to help them understand that security is not 100%. It will never be 100%. That's why I use the word protect, because we're actually protecting the network, we're not securing the network. Because in their mind's eye, when I say I'm securing the network, they think I'm 100%. And we're upgrading to Windows 7, and then we still have vulnerabilities. But Bill, you said, well, no. What I said to you was we needed to go to Windows 7 because of these following reasons. What I didn't say to you is that we were going to be 100% secure. There's some certain vulnerabilities that we could mitigate and get rid of because of our upgrade to 7, but we didn't mitigate all vulnerabilities. So when I say to use the word protect, They, in their mind's eye, understand that when I'm protecting something, just like the police, there's still a residual risk, right? Police cannot protect us against all crime, right? We know that. We intuitively understand that. The same thing in security. We have to help our senior executives as well as users understand that security is there to protect, not there to secure, because we're never going to get there. Any questions for me? Comments? Complaints? Not? I'm like 5 minutes over. I apologize.